Good morning. The title of this sermon is Having the Goodwill of All the People. There have been dozens and dozens of books written on why Christianity succeeded. 250 years ago, the British historian Edward Gibbon started it off with his book, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, which makes the case that the Roman Empire collapsed and Christianity succeeded because the Roman Empire, and in particular Roman leaders, became viewed by the masses as horribly corrupt and decadent. And Christianity, with its strong moral and ethical values, became the radical alternative that people gravitated to. The religious historian Elaine Pagels attributes the rise of Christianity to the fact that Jesus was a peasant Messiah who came from the bottom rung of society and proclaimed a gospel that was good news to all people, and especially those on the bottom rung. No other religious movement had this sort of inclusion. The biblical scholar and historian Wayne Meeks attributes the rise of Christianity and the fall of the Roman civilization to the ethic of love, which was at the center of Christianity, and has this incredible innate sense of rightness, which the vast majority of people, regardless of status, class, or wealth, can appreciate. Elizabeth Clark, who teaches at Duke, which has the odd distinction of being a great religious institution, yes, a Methodist school, yet has a mascot called a Blue Devil. Go figure. Anyway, Elizabeth Clark attributes the success of Christianity to the way Christianity allowed people of all walks, stations, genders, and ethnicities to find a place in the life of faith, and therefore a sense of belonging. L. Michael White, who teaches religious studies at the University of Texas, says it was Christianity's ability to reach out and incorporate into the faith community new immigrants, far better than traditional Roman society, which became very anti-immigrant. And Michael White also says that this way of caring for one another made Christians more able to handle periodic plagues and pandemics. In other words, the church kept people alive through the calamities of life, which allowed Christianity to multiply. So there are many, many different theories, and each provides a different angle, a different slant. Yet if you look at nearly all of them, you will find one thread that runs through each. And that one thread, that one key factor, it is this: the genius of Jesus and the power of Christianity is this incredible focus on building community and caring for one another. Take a look at the last section of the second chapter of Acts. It is one of the most beautiful scriptures in the entire Bible, as it describes the earliest church. It says, the believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and prayer. Awe came upon everyone because many signs and wonders were being done by the apostles. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. Day by day, they spent much time together in the temple, and they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. That word sozo, to be made whole. Now, there is a lot going on in this description. It includes worship. It includes teaching. It includes prayer. Yet while all of these are mentioned, what is clearly dominant is the description of the church as building community and caring for one another. It says, 1, they devoted themselves to fellowship. 2, all who believed were together and shared all things in common. 3, they would sell their possessions and share with all as any had need. And 4, they spent much time together in the temple. In this one passage, that has been described as the most clear description in the entire Bible of the values and the spirit of the early Christian church. You find over and over again the building of community and caring for one another regardless of class, ethnicity, gender. You know the phrase, all are welcome and all means all. Well, that is the essence of this passage in Acts 2. I want to focus on what may be the most important part of that description this day. It could be described as the outcome. It is this: they had the goodwill of all the people. By the way, all the people doesn't just include Christians by any means. It truly means all the people. Christianity was still a very small minority religion, even in Palestine, which was dominated by Judaism, followed by paganism. Christianity initially was a distant third. Yet the non-Christian world, the vast majority of people, noticed. They noticed the values and the spirit of this small minority religious group that eventually came to be called Christianity. The world noticed the way they built community. The world noticed the way they cared for one another. True to what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, they became like a city on a hill whose light shines into the darkness, and all people are able to see. Right now, we are in the midst of a worldwide pandemic, the first in our lifetime, first in 100 years. It's incredibly difficult and frightening. Nearly all people will measure time differently moving forward. 2020 will be the year that people lay down as a marker. Our children will talk about remembering 2020 the way older folks remember 9/11 or the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And adults will see it as a great dividing line in history, before 2020 and after 2020. It is immense and overwhelming. The economies of the world will almost certainly experience the greatest shock since the Great Depression. Currently, over 30 million Americans have lost their jobs over the last 5 weeks. And the same phenomenon has happened worldwide. Certain industries, the airline, the cruise industry, will never return exactly to the way they functioned before 2020. There will be huge changes in our world. Yet we don't know exactly what our world will look like when we emerge from this pandemic. And it's tough. At our staff meeting this last week, we noted that people are getting weary. You're getting tired. The initial novelty is worn off, and we are settling in for a longer haul, and it's hard. It is tough economically. It is especially tough emotionally. Yet Acts 2 didn't just represent a description of the way the first followers of Jesus lived. It represents the values of Jesus, period. The unchanging values of not only thinking about ourselves, the unchanging values of sharing what we have with others, the unchanging value of valuing all people, regardless of status, regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of sexual orientation. That all means all stuff. It was real then. It's to be real now. And it stood out then to the world. And guess what? It stands out just as bright to the world today. As followers of Jesus, we are constantly struggling with hypocrisy. There is always a gap between the way we know we are called to live as followers of Jesus and the way we actually live our lives. Yet like the frog in the kettle, in which the water temp slowly rises, we often don't notice the change until, well, frankly, we're cooked. I have never met a long-term Christian that hasn't at some key moment in their life, an important moment, come to the realization that they were getting cooked. The realization that something is deeply wrong, that they have gotten off track, that we have sold out or fundamentally compromised our core values, that we have placed our bank accounts above following Jesus, that we have placed our wants ahead of the welfare of others, that we have placed our need to be right ahead of the work of doing what is right. A week and a half ago, our daughter-in-law, Valerie, texted me a link to a video created by a 26-year-old British poet by the name Thomas Roberts, who writes under the pseudonym Probably Tomfoolery. Thomas Roberts, who lives in England, was feeling scared, anxious, lonely, and depressed, like most of us. And he was seeing these same feelings in nearly everyone around him, and especially in his young siblings, his younger brother Kai and younger sister Sarah, who, by the way, both appear in the video. The poem that came to him was of a future time, perhaps a generation from now, looking back to the great virus of 2020. In the video, Thomas portrays a father reading a bedtime story to his son. The little boy asks his father to read him the story about the virus, saying emphatically, "That's my favorite." Then the video shows a classic-looking book with the title, The Great Realization, spelled the British way with an S instead of a Z. What unfolds is a story of a number of values in the present, our time right now, that Thomas Roberts, the poet, finds deeply disturbing and deeply destructive. You'll see them in the video. The destruction of the environment, the growing divide between the rich who have wealth almost beyond measure and the great many who live in poverty, of consumerism in which our wants and our desires are just a click away and they arrive the next day, of technology that we have placed our salvation upon, separating us from one another and not providing the salvation we most need. What works with such power is the poetic way that this horrible virus that forces us to stay at home, that frightens us, leads to a quantum shift in thinking, namely the Great Realization, which is the title of the poem. With the Great Realization, when the cure to the virus is found, there is no yearning to go back to the world as it had been. Instead, a new set of values, a new set of priorities that were unearthed and remembered during the pandemic of 2020 brought forth a renewal of the quality of life and faith that had long been suppressed. This great realization is what happens with the hindsight of 2020, a clever double entendre, a time of honest reckoning and seeing clearly our lives and our values and our faith. Let's hear and watch the video.